Hello, hello, and welcome to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories here on KFred Radio. I'm Janet Monroe. I'm a birth mother, a storyteller, or perhaps more accurately, a listener of stories. I believe that every adoption story matters because every adoption story reaches far beyond the people directly involved. Today's guest is an amazing woman, and I have to admit, her story may be one of the most unique we've heard on this program. She is the biological mother of 4 children, a former foster parent to 17 children, and the adoptive mother of a sibling group of 6. But her journey didn't stop there. Years later, she found herself walking alongside her own daughter as she made the difficult decision to place her first grandchild for adoption. Through all of those experiences, she's seen firsthand how adoption, foster care, trauma, loss, healing, and belonging weave their way through generations of the family, and how adoption can come full circle. Today, she uses those experiences to help other families navigate the emotional realities that go unspoken. This is a conversation about what children need most, what families learn when life doesn't go according to plan, and how hope can be found even in the most complicated circumstances. So let's get started. Today, I'm especially honored to welcome Bonnie Butler to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories. So welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Janet. It's an honor for me to be here with you.
I'm really glad to have you today. And I'd kind of like to start this conversation about how you actually grew up and how your husband grew up and how that put you in the line that you went, the life that you followed.
Okay. So my husband grew up, his parents were married to other people. They met, they decided they belonged together. His mom brought 2 children with her. His dad brought a child with him. They married, they had 2 children. They fostered several children and adopted 3 of the children that they fostered. So my husband grew up with hers, his, theirs, and everybody else's. And I grew up the exact opposite. My parents got married, 7 children. My dad passed away just prior to their 65th anniversary. My mom passed away a year later. And I had a much more stable upbringing as far as family dynamics than my husband. But when we were dating and started to get a little bit more serious, discussing whether or not we might have a future together, we talked about what a family would look like, what we thought we wanted our family to look like. And he said that he shared his experience with foster kids coming and going and how hard that was on him. And he just has a very tender heart and he loves children. So he said, I do not want to foster because I don't like the kids coming and going. It's just too hard. But I would like at some point to adopt. And so we kind of kept that in mind. We ended up married, obviously. We just celebrated our 47th anniversary.
Congratulations.
But thank you. After we had been married probably about 6 or 8 years, somewhere in that time frame, we looked into adoption. And at the time, our youngest was, I think he was 3 or 4 years old. And as we were looking into adoption, they told us that we could not adopt an infant because we had 4 biological children unless we went private and paid thousands of dollars through a lawyer. If we wanted to adopt through any of the local agencies or the state agencies, that we would have to adopt an older child. And I said, well, how old is an older child, looking at the ages of my children? And they said, well, we've started classifying 2-year-olds as older children because they've already had so much trauma and they are seeing the impact of that as they grow. And at that point, we felt like that was a little more than we wanted to take on because our kids were still pretty young. So we just kind of shelved it. And honestly, we didn't really think about it again for years. And down the road, we ended up making some friends in one of the cities that we lived in. We've moved numerous times with my husband's employment. And one of our dearest friends, who had spent a lot of time with us, hanging out with us and doing stuff together with our family and their family, asked us if we would consider becoming foster parents. And we said no, based on my husband's experience and the conversation we had had before we got married. And we said, but we would be interested in adopting. And he was so wise in his counsel to us because he said, okay, well, if you want to adopt children, you're going to have children who are going to come from trauma and from hard places, and they are going to have behavior issues. And if you want to find out, can you raise someone else's child, you really should start with foster care because you're going to have the same kinds of behaviors and struggles and traumatic backgrounds. And you're going to find out, can I handle these behaviors? Can I really parent children with these behaviors? And if you can do that, you can move forward with adoption. If you can't, then you can stop being a foster parent much cleaner and just get out of that situation where if you go straight into adoption and you adopt a child and then you discover that you really cannot handle it, it is really just excruciatingly painful for the parents, for the child, for everyone involved in that situation. It is really, really a painful decision to have to make that you cannot keep that child in your home. So we made the decision to do dual licensing, and we got licensed to do foster care and adoption at the same time.
What does it take to actually get a license to be a foster parent?
So at that time, and this was back in the 90s in California, and we had to go through psychological evaluations. We had to have all of our background run. We had full in-depth background checks done. You have to be fingerprinted. You have to have a home study done. They interview your children that are already living in the home. They come and visit your home and inspect it and make sure that everything is okay and safe and that you have room for children. So it was a pretty in-depth process.
How did your children feel about becoming foster brothers and sisters?
Our children, and I really do just give them such kudos, I guess, because they were very open to helping other children. And we didn't bring any child into our home that had not been discussed and agreed upon with all of the members of the family. We didn't always bring them into the conversation right at the beginning with the first phone call that we had been asked, but when we had enough information, because generally they call you and ask you if you can take the kids and they give you some information. And if you say yes, then they'll give you a little more information, right? And so when we had enough information that we felt confident in where we wanted to go with it, we would sit down and talk with our kids about it. And they were just so gracious with their time and with their space in their rooms. And, it wasn't always a bed of roses, that's for sure. Well, it might be. Roses have lots of thorns. So it might actually have been a bed of roses. But, there were many, many challenges and many difficult and challenging days and experiences, but there were also a lot of fun and rewarding days where things were happy and everybody was getting along and things were going well.
So, did it mean that your children had to share rooms with these children, or did they have these children that you were fostering have to have their own rooms, or how does that work?
So for us, the first three little ones that we had, we had two sisters and a brother come, and our two boys shared a room, and so we put the little boy in the room with our sons, and each of our daughters took one of the girls in their bedroom with them. So yeah, and there weren't really, you can't have, it's kind of based on square footage. It was at that point in time. Depending on the square footage of the bedroom, you can have X number of children in that room. So there has to be a specific amount of space for each child to have the space in that room. And we were blessed at that time with a pretty decent sized home. We had 4 bedrooms. So the kids that, when we were looking for a home, our daughters are close in age, and they were just, their personalities are black and white, and they just were at that age where they just were not getting along as best friends. They are now beautifully connected and best friends, but our boys are 4 years apart, and so our boys got along together better than our girls did. And I told my husband, we either need to find a home that has room that the girls can each have their own room, or we need a large enough room that they can have their own space within the room, because they're going to kill each other. They are just at odds all the time because their personalities were so very different. So,
And you said that you went through 17 children. Did they just come in groups? How many did you have at one time, or how does that work? How did you had 3? You said 2 sisters and a brother, and then they went back somewhere, or they went into adoption, or
they went into adoption. So those, our very first 3 little ones that we had, were, they came out of a family that had been split up, and lots of, I think they had 7 kids total. Mom had taken one of the kids and fled the state, and dad was in and out of prison. And the other kids were in and out of different foster homes. And these 3 were the youngest 3 of those 7. So they had been together for a little while in another home, and that home had changed and had become a little bit of an abusive situation with the kids. So they needed to get them out of there. And so they came to us very rapidly. Our friend called and said, "I have your license. Do you want kids tomorrow or Thursday?" And it was a Monday. And I was like, "What kids? What are you talking about?" Because I didn't know that he had children in mind. And so I said Thursday, give myself a couple of days to prep and find beds and all of those things. But they came in and they just stole our hearts. You know, they just were very precious children. And they did have their ups and downs. And, you know, the 3-year-old just, every night she would just cry and cry and cry at bedtime, and she was just having a real difficult time at bedtime. She was good during the day and happy during the day, and at bedtime everything just changed, and she would just cry and cry. And finally, after a couple of weeks, when she was a little more comfortable with us, and I would sit in with her and try to comfort her and console her until she fell asleep. And the one night, asking her, you know, what are you, you know, why is this? And she just said, "I'm scared." And I said, "Well, what are you afraid of?" And she said, "The window." And I thought, the window? Why would you be afraid of a window? So as I was doing some research with the social workers and finding out some background about what had happened to her, it turned out that when they were with their biological parents, who were involved in numerous illegal activities, if the police were knocking on the front door, somebody would run out the back and somebody would go grab the kids and toss them out their bedroom windows to people waiting outside, who would run with the children to keep them away from the police and away from protective services taking them. So for this little 3-year-old, a window was a very frightening thing, because at any given moment she was grabbed and tossed out the window to somebody. So for her, going to sleep at night next to a window was very difficult. So once we knew what was going on, we just moved her bed to the other side of the bedroom, and we put my older daughter, who was a teenager, by the window instead. And from then on, she went to bed and slept every night because she was protected from the window. She wasn't afraid anymore. So, yeah.
After those three, was it one-on-ones or?
Um, to start with, yeah. And those three little ones were with us for 4 months, and then they were placed in an adoptive home that was across the state from us where they would be safe. Then our next placement was actually one of their older siblings. And he was placed with us at 13 with the intent that he would stay with us until he was 18. He was not eligible for adoption at that time. And then the next placement was two brothers. One was 14 and one was 3 years old. And they stayed with us for a while until they were reunited with their mom. The next placement we had were two boys and a girl. Um, and they stayed with us for a few months until they moved them to another placement. And yeah. So they came in. I think the one was the only single that we got. And other than that, there were always sibling groups that came. And then the last group that came was the group of 6 siblings. And when they came, they were placed with us with the intent that they would stay permanently with us. And at that point, we closed the revolving door and said, we don't have the space or the capacity to have our family plus these 6. And we had, at the time they came, we had 2 14-year-old foster boys with us. So that gave us 12 kids altogether in the house. And well, 11, because my oldest had graduated high school and was out. But we felt like that was our max. We were maxed out at that point, and since the intent was that they were to stay with us, and one of the 14-year-olds was intended to stay with us, and the other one was working on reunification, and he did eventually go back home to his mom again. So at that point, yeah, no more revolving door, and trying to figure out how to become one family with all these kids.
The family of 6, they ranged in age from what to what?
From 4 to 10. So there was only one boy, and he was the 4-year-old. The other 5 were all girls, and they were 6 8-year-old twins, 9 and 10.
And at this point in time, you only had 3 of your biological children at home.
Yeah, and they were all teenagers. They were. One was a sophomore. They were going into. Our youngest biological was going into a sophomore year, and then my younger daughter was going to be a senior, and the next older daughter had graduated a week or two before the 6 moved in with us. So she had started college and was working.
So, and how did they feel about having 6 all of a sudden siblings?
In the beginning, we were all a little overwhelmed, just the thought. I remember the day, the phone call that came, and I was completely blindsided because prior to that, we had had 7 phone calls asking us to adopt different groups of kids, different sibling groups. And every time it fell apart for one reason or another. It just fell apart and didn't happen. And as our son graduated high school and was getting ready to leave, we made the decision that we were done with all this adoption roller coaster that, 7 shots, it didn't happen, it wasn't meant to. So we decided that when we got back from dropping him off, we were going to take our name off of the availability list, and you have to do that in writing. So we got home, and I was trying to get things caught up, laundry done, everything else the first day we were home, and thought I'll get the letter written that week and get it off to them that we were going to just move forward. We had a house full of teenagers, and we were almost every single sibling group they had called us to adopt were young kids, little ones, some toddlers, and in that age range. And we just said, let's just, our lives are moving in a different direction. In a few years, our kids are all going to be out of high school, and let's just be done with this roller coaster. So Tuesday morning about 9 o'clock, my phone rang. And it was a social worker that we'd worked with several times. And we just chatted a bit and caught up with each other, just how is life going, right? And then she said, well, I wanted to know if you and Joe would be willing to adopt a sibling group of 6. And I didn't have a mirror by my phone, but I have no doubt there's just utter and complete shock on my face. You, what? You want me to what? And I was like, I don't even know that that's possible. We couldn't financially. I don't think we could handle 6 more children. And as we talked, and she said, well, set the finances aside. If finances are not an issue, would you be willing to take these kids? And, I asked some questions about ages and why are they coming available for adoption, what's happened with the birth family, and what are the circumstances that they're currently in, why are they in this situation, and tried to get some information as much as she could give me at that point. And by the time the phone call ended, I had not realized while I was on the phone with her, but when I went to hang up, I'd actually slid down the wall and was sitting on the floor. I don't know whether that was a precursor to the weight of what was coming or just so overwhelmed with this discussion. But I left it with her that I would have to talk to my husband and that I would get back to her, that this was not a decision that we could take lightly. And so my husband was working in the prison system at the time, and I had no way to get a hold of him. So, cell phones didn't exist back then. And even if I had had a phone, I couldn't have called him because of where he worked. So I was alone with that question all day long. Can we do this? And in the afternoon, I went to pick up my kids from the middle school and the high school. And on the way home, my daughters both had had some issues come up and were telling me kind of what had happened, what was going on, and they needed some help getting these things resolved. And they were just normal teenage things. While we were gone dropping our son off, my daughter had been in an accident with the car. It was somebody else's fault, but we had to deal with all the insurance issues with all of that. And I don't really even remember what the other one was, but they were normal life events that we have to deal with. And so when Joe came home from work, I said, hey, we need to talk. And went back to our room and I said, so we got to deal with the insurance for this accident. This is, kind of where things are at, what they told our daughter needed to be done. Our other daughter has this going on. Oh, and by the way, Kathy called and wants to know if we want to take a sibling group of 6, 5 girls and a boy. And he looked at me and he said, are you insane? You just said, our girls are having these issues going on, and now you're telling me you want 5 more girls? And I said, hold on. I didn't say I want them. I said, Kathy asked if we were willing to take them. And so we decided that we needed to separate out what had been happening with our kids from whether or not we took these 6 kids. And decided that we needed to do a lot of praying. We're people of faith and believe in God, and spent the next several weeks just in prayer and asking our family members to pray with us and to help us figure this out. And every time we said, okay, well, we're comfortable with this, then they would give us a little more information and we'd have to adapt to, are we comfortable with that next step of information and the next step? And ultimately, we made the decision that we were going to move forward with this. It felt different than all of the other situations. It felt much more overwhelming than being asked to take on 2. But there was something about this situation that we both knew this one was going to come to pass. This was going to happen. It was going to be a lot. And so in the beginning, our kids were doing pretty well with it. We started They lived in the same city, but they were in a different school district, and there were only 6 weeks left in the school year, so we didn't want to move them prior to the end of the school year. So we started doing respite care and taking them for the weekends. So we would go pick them up on Friday afternoon. They'd spend the weekend with us, and we'd take them back to the previous foster home on Sunday nights. And those weekends became utter and complete chaos. My youngest biological child came and said, "Can you and Dad reconsider and not do this? This is crazy. This is just so much." And I told him, I understand it, and I see the chaos and everything that's happening. And I said, but I also have had that confirmation that this is right, that we are supposed to take these children and make them a part of our family. And I said, I would just encourage you to be prayerful and get that answer. And he said, Mom, I have that. So it took him a little while longer. And, in the overall scheme of things, my kids were very open and very loving and very accepting. And at the same time, up until this placement, we had made the adjustments and the transitions pretty smoothly. This transition was not as smooth because there were so many, and they came the first day of summer. So there wasn't even any break to where they went to school during the day or had anything else going on. So they were at home all day long. And it was pretty intense over that summer. And my kids really started to feel over that first year or two, my biological kids started to feel like they had lost me a little bit because I had been very involved. I had been coaching my youngest son's roller hockey team. I had tried to be at every event that my kids had. If they were in a concert, if they were in a play, if they had a sporting event going on, we were there, and I tried to always be involved in everything they were doing. And I wasn't always able to do that anymore. And so sometimes, the kids had appointments with therapy or doctor's appointments, or the behaviors were just so out of control that day that we couldn't go. And so, in hindsight, my kids were very quiet about that. They did not complain very often. Every once in a while, they would express their frustration, but for the most part, they were very, very supportive, and they did their best to try to help the kids as much as they could. As adults now, they'll tell me some of the stories. And I do know my youngest biological son caught the flu, and he was pretty sick. And a friend called and said, I heard that he was homesick. And I said, yeah, he's not feeling so well. And she said, can I go to the store and bring him some soup and some crackers and some 7-Up, some popsicles, anything that will help him to feel better? And I said, he would really appreciate that. So I asked him what he wanted. And when she brought that over, he was so touched by that. And he said, Mom, I kind of thought that everybody had forgotten us because everything had so centered on the adopted kids. All of the focus had gone there, and people were constantly donating clothes to us and donating games or anything they thought the kids might want. And so there was so much focus on that he had felt forgotten. That he was very grateful that this friend had not forgotten that he was there. So, yeah.
Makes a difference.
It does make a difference. Yeah.
In foster care, for foster care, do you get paid to have those children? Like the stipend or some stipend to help you with those children? And does the same happen with adoption as well, or is that makes it separate?
So with foster care, there is a monthly stipend. It is not much, and in all honesty, it does not cover the entire cost of having the kids in your home. There are some things that are mandatory. Every month, they must have new clothing purchased for them, and you have an allotment for that clothing. You are required to spend the money, turn the receipts in, and then they'll reimburse you for the money that you spent for the clothes. And you're not allowed to, like one of our foster boys wanted some tennis shoes that were really expensive. And we said, can we save up his allotment for 3 months and then use that to purchase the shoes? And they said, no, the allotment has to be spent every single month. And the most we might be able to fudge is 1 month. You might be able to roll over 1 month into the second month, but you can't go beyond that. And so it's there, but it doesn't cover the total cost of having the child in the home. And now I don't know kind of what the stipulations are, if they've changed or where, how it works now, but that's how it worked then. When we were looking at the adoption, and I had been very upfront and said, there's just no way financially we can take on 6 more children, looking at the needs that they would have, the therapies they were going to need, and the treatments, and college and sports and everything else that would happen. We just could not take that on for 6 kids. But because we were willing to take the group of 6, there were specific funds that were available to help. And because all of the kids had been drug exposed and in utero, and all of them were academically behind. There were days and weeks when their parents just didn't take them to school. So then you have to have tutoring and programs and everything to help with that. So because of the diagnosis for them, there were funds available to help with that. Depending on what the situation is with the child, there may not be any funds available for the child, or there may be, and each of our kids were at a different rate, a different level, because it was very individual on what that child's needs were and what extra help they were going to need and how they were going to, what funding was available, I forget what they have different groups, right? Different types of funding available for different needs. And so depending on what the child needs, there may be funds available to help with that. So,
And
again, it
what
doesn't
about the
cover
health
everything, but it does help offset it.
and healthcare? They take care of the healthcare for you, or is that something that you have?
So when they're in foster care, they are covered by the state programs. So they do have access to care. It's often not fabulous care at the state level. Once we adopted the kids and the adoption was finalized, then they were put onto our health insurance plans, and we were able to cover that with our own health insurance, so, which made a huge difference.
All right. So getting back to the actual children, that that
Yeah.
that was just the. Did you find that there was any common thread with the children as to the trauma that they're going through, the emotions, or what a common thread that you had to deal with?
Yes, they are. So all of the kids that came into our home across the board, all of them dealt with food insecurity issues, because so often when they're in those situations, they are not fed. Mom and dad are not mentally together enough to make sure the kids are being fed. And so then when they come into your home, all they want to do is eat and eat and eat and eat because they have food available to them. So we did run into a lot of food issues. They also were very picky about, well, not all of them. Some of them were very, very particular about what they would and would not eat. And so then you're all over the place with that, right? And in our home, we just looked at it. We are not a short order kitchen. This is the meal that we're having for dinner. We're having it as a family, and we are all having this meal because there weren't any allergy issues. But mealtime was a battle across the board. And with the final placement, the 6, I got to a point where I just kicked him out of the kitchen. I was like, nope, you cannot come in the kitchen when meals are being prepped, because if they saw an ingredient they thought they didn't like going into the meal, then they did not want to eat the meal, and they would just raise Cain in the kitchen. It would be total chaos. And if I didn't respond to the one who was complaining, they would go round up the rest of them, and then I would have all of them in the kitchen complaining. And so I got to the point where they were banned from the kitchen. And if they said, "What's for dinner?" I would say food. And unfortunately, I kept that kitchen ban in way too long. And so some of them ended up heading for college without good kitchen skills, because it had just been such an overwhelming situation to have everybody in the kitchen complaining and upset over what was going on. And eventually they settled in a little bit, and they were much calmer around mealtime. But several years in, we had been trying to manage the eating issues and working with psychologists and their therapists and their doctors and everybody together, trying to figure out what is going to work best for them. And they said, you guys are going to just have to lock down your kitchen. You can't have an open kitchen. They don't have any ability to contain themselves, right? And one of the things that really helped us understand kind of what was happening, we were given a study that they had done with kids who are in just constant survival mode, where that fight or flight mechanism is constantly triggering, and then the brain is constantly having adrenaline bathe through it and rush through it, because the kids are always afraid, right? And they never know. Everything in their life is so uncertain. So the brain then starts to feel that that's normal to have adrenaline running through it all the time. So then when they take these kids and they put them in calm environments and stable, safe environments, then the kids don't know how to handle that, and their brain can't figure out what's going on. And so they intentionally will cause chaos or do something to create that adrenaline rush through the brain. And then the brain settles in and says, okay, now I'm okay, because the adrenaline is there. So that explained some of the chaotic behavior, because everything would be totally calm. And then all of a sudden, one of them would do something and chaos would break loose everywhere. So that helped us understand what was happening with that, why that kept happening. And this was probably 5 years down the road. Um, but the other thing that showed up in that is that the trigger to tell you that you're full, that you don't need any more food, that doesn't develop. So the adrenaline in the brain stunts very specific areas of the brain from growing. And that is one of the areas that gets stunted, is the ability to feel full. So their brain never tells them, you're full, you don't need to eat anymore. So they will eat and eat and eat, and not ever have that signal go that you don't need anymore. So we had to really sit down with them and go over what is healthy eating, what is not healthy eating. And we came up with an agreement that we would have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they could have one snack in the afternoon. And that ended up being the pattern for us. And then we also had to make a decision with them about what is enough at a meal. How many servings are enough? And so we ended up deciding with them, because we included them in these discussions, that 2 servings, that they could have the first serving and they could have seconds, but we don't need to have third and fourth and fifth servings. So trying to help them establish healthy eating habits and healthy foods was a pretty common thread among them. Um, Life being fair and unfair is a very common complaint, that they all have a sense of unfairness of life. And as adults, and we all know that life isn't fair, that's just part of life, right? You can't really define what's fair. And so we try, rather than go with fair, you try to go with equitable, right? and have each child's needs being met. But that was often, hey, that's not fair. They got this and they got that. And, back to a food issue. If we gave them anything that could be counted, if I put a handful of grapes in front of each one of them, they would start counting to see who had more grapes than the other one. And then it was not fair. She got 5 grapes and I got 4. And after a while, I just got so tired of the counting and the fighting over it not being fair because I hadn't counted out the exact number of potato chips or raisins or whatever it was. If it was countable, they counted. So if they started counting, I would just take it off the table and just, no, that's, you're done. I'm not dealing with that. And so somebody would start counting and one of the other kids, don't count, she'll take it away. Don't count, just eat what you were given. And my husband, if he was fixing lunch for them and serving them, and they started counting the potato chips or something, and they would, well, she got 10 potato chips and I got 9. And he would just smash their pile of chips and say, well, now you have 100. And so just trying to figure out the best ways to help them get through some of those things. That doesn't really matter if she got 10 chips and you have 8 chips. Is that something that we need to fight over, right? And let's see, what were some other ones? There were a lot of struggles at bedtime with all of them across the board, different, when you have been in situations that are very traumatic, sometimes sleep doesn't come easily. And so bedtime becomes a more complicated time of day when you're trying to help them to feel calm. And, you have children who have been abused in every way you can imagine, and they don't want to go to bed and they don't want to go to sleep because dreams come and memories come, and that's something that is very painful for them. And so they try to stay awake as late as possible because they don't want the risk of that happening. And so sitting with them and reading stories at night and just trying to comfort them and reassure them that they're safe and that it's going to be okay to go to sleep. It will be all right. And unfortunately, almost all of the kids that are in these situations, they learn to manipulate and they learn to lie and be dishonest in order to survive. And so then you're dealing with that behavior a lot and trying to figure out how do you get them to a point where they're trusting enough to know that they can just be honest and that honesty is a better policy than dishonesty and manipulation. But when from a very young age, the only way they can get what they need and have their needs met, and we're talking basic needs, we're not talking, let's go shopping at the mall for trinkets we don't need. We're talking food and clothing and shelter and things that they need. Those become deeply ingrained in them, and it's a difficult thing for them to overcome. So that takes a while and that takes a lot of work to get to a point where they will trust you enough to start being honest with you about what's going on and what they're feeling and how things are going.
Are you an empty nester now?
No. Oh, my husband and I laugh. We're not sure that's ever going to be our future. But yeah, before our first child was born, my husband's brother-in-law called up and asked if he could come and stay with us for a little while. He and his wife were going through some struggles. And so he moved in with us and he brought his brother, and his brother had 2 little boys. So we had the 4 of them move in with us before our first child was born. And from that point forward, it's never, ever just been my husband and I. There's always been someone living with us at some point in time. My sister lived with us for a little while. My husband's sister lived with us for 18 months. And before our youngest were out of the home, our oldest called and said they were moving to our area. They were coming. It was cross states. They lived 2 states away and they were moving into our area and could they stay with us for about 6 months while they found housing and got settled and got everything taken care of? And we said, sure, we don't, we'll make it work. And that was 18 years ago. And when they moved in, they had one 14-month-old little boy, and that 14-month-old is 19 and graduated from high school last year. And there are 3 more siblings. But there have been many times over the last 18 years when we thought they were going to move out or we were going to move and we would end up separated. And for whatever reason, it has not ever worked out to separate. And, we just look and we tell people that was not their plan. It was not our plan. It appears to be God's plan. And when we have decided to go with God's plan, our lives have gone easier. So it has been a very unique experience because it's not an experience we ever anticipated having. And yet my daughter-in-law, who I knew very, very little when they moved in, has become one of my dearest friends. And I think that the reason that we've made it work is from the time that they moved in, we sat down together and we said, what are your expectations of us? And these are our expectations of you. And when that needs adjusted, we sit down and talk and we make adjustments to that. And we have been able to have open conversations. There have been difficult days, and you're going to have difficult days when you're all living together. But at the same time, we have been able to communicate well with each other about what's going on. And for me, if I am upset or really struggling with something, I don't want to discuss it in the moment. I want some time to just work through it for myself, and then I can go and say, okay, can we talk? And this is how I'm feeling. This is what I feel like happened. This was my perception of it, and just be able to have those conversations. And we've had some heated discussions at times over the years. But I think the other thing as well is that we look at them as an independent. I don't try to still parent them.
Right.
They're adults. And I do not parent their children. When we are responsible for the kids, then they are expected to follow Grandma and Papa's rules. But when mom and dad are in the house, mom and dad are in charge, and we don't ever undermine them with their kids. And we have tried to be very careful with those boundaries, that they are the parents of these children. And whether or not we agree with the decision they make, that's none of our business. That's their parenting with their children. And, the kids will come to us and, I'll say, well, what did mom and dad say about this? And it just, mom and dad are in the house. You need to go talk to mom and dad. You need to get mom and dad's permission to do this. I'm not the first line of defense unless they're gone. So I think that they have been respectful of us. We've been respectful of them and their family unit. And it
works.
We moved from California to Texas together, and that was not on our agenda either, but here we are. It's been a blessing in many ways.
So let's talk now about your role as the grandmother for the baby that was put up for adoption, placed for adoption.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I have not felt like I have a missing grandchild. Walking through that circumstance with my daughter, and for your listeners, I want to just clarify that I do have my daughter's permission to share this. And when she came to us and told us that she was expecting, she was in her early 20s. And she was not married and did not feel that she was in a place in her life where she could raise a child on her own. And over the next several weeks and months, as we considered options, she felt pretty strongly that she needed to place this baby for adoption. And she felt like that was the right plan and that that's where she was being led. And there was a time when she talked to us and said, could you guys just take the baby and raise the baby? And as we were prayerful about that and pondered the option of doing that, we didn't feel that that was the right answer in this situation. And when we talked to her, she said, you know, Mom, I knew that it wasn't. I know that you guys are not the right placement for this baby, but I also felt like I needed to ask and I needed that reassurance. And one of the things that we have seen happen repeatedly is so often the grandparents, when they find out that adoption is being talked about, they interfere and they don't let their child place the baby for adoption. And they think they're doing what's best, but sometimes they are, and sometimes that works out very well, but sometimes it doesn't work out well at all. And the child may have had a better experience, a better childhood, having been placed for adoption. And so it's not a decision that I would advise anyone to take lightly. And I would just encourage parents to not make it about you. It's not about you. It's about your daughter or your son who's in that circumstance and what is best for them and what is best for the child that's coming. And I think that when we as grandparents can step back and allow our children to figure out what is the best situation for them and then be supportive in that situation. And we were 100% supportive of her decision to place the child for adoption. And we stayed with her. She lived with us for a while, and then she went and lived with some friends in a different city because she felt like that was what was best for her. And they were more than willing to take her in and have her live with them. We were able to be with her when the child was born. She made the decision in the state that she was in at the time. There's a 72-hour waiting period from the time the child is born to the time the child is placed with the chosen family, because she did choose the family that was going to adopt this child. She was able to choose them. And she chose, you can either keep the baby with you, or there are foster families who foster these newborns for the 72 hours. And she wanted to keep the child with her. So we helped her over those 3 days with that precious little baby. And sorry, get a little emotional here.
Yeah.
We were able to be with her when she placed that baby in those parents' arms. And I will tell you, these are not tears of sadness or sorrow. These are tears of memory of one of the most sacred experiences I ever had in my life. It was truly just a beautiful, beautiful experience as we sat and visited with this young couple who had not been able to have children and talked with them. And we knew their first names. We were not, told their last names because it was a closed adoption. From the time we left that building that day, we would not see them again or know them again. We had the opportunity. My daughter could have written to them anytime that she wanted over that first year. That was too painful for her, and she didn't do that. But they did send us every month. They would send us a letter, and they would send us pictures of the baby. And so we had that contact coming in, and that was a requirement for the first year. And after the first year, then we didn't hear from them. But as they visited with my daughter, and she was able to share her experience with them, and they shared their experience with her, and they chose the baby's name right there in that meeting while we were with them. And she actually was very instrumental, and she shared with them some names that had come to mind for her. And they actually did use one of those names as his first name. And so she felt very confident in that was the right decision and this was the right family for this baby to be a part of. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of heartache involved, right? And even when you know that something is right, it can be painful and it can be hard. And coming home, she asked if she could just put a cot at the end of our bed and just sleep in our room for a few days because she was feeling that emptiness and that loss of having, you have that baby in your body for 9 months and then in your arms for 3 days and now you don't. And that was difficult for her and it was painful even though she knew that it was right. So she stayed in our room with us for I think a week or so before she went and moved back into her own bedroom. And she didn't stay in the bed other than at night. She would just come and sleep on the cot because she didn't want to be in a room by herself. Over the years, we never forgot him, but honestly, I never ever felt that I was missing a grandchild, that I was missing this piece of my family. I think because we just had such a beautiful experience knowing that he was where he belonged, that I had sorrow in my heart for my daughter, for the experience and the pain that she was going through. But I did not have a hole in my heart for a missing child. And I think there's a difference between that. And so we had an absolutely beautiful experience last December when I got a message, and I had kind of had an impression for a couple of weeks that I would be hearing from this child. And I thought that it would come through ancestry DNA testing because we'd done our DNA, and I thought, oh, they'll probably at some point do their DNA and then they'll know of the connection. And I received a message on Facebook from this child saying, hey, I know this is coming out of the blue and I hope it's not going to be too much of a blindside, but I am pretty sure that your daughter is my biological mother. And when I read the message, I took a deep breath and I was like, okay, I have been prepared for this to come. And I sent a message back and I said, can you tell me your full name, your parents' names, just their first names was all I knew, and where you were born and your birth date. And he sent all of that information back to me to verify that it was the right connection. And so I sent back and confirmed, okay, yes, you have found the right family. And interestingly enough, and you and I discussed this in our little pre-interview, I don't believe in coincidences. He was home from college. He's in his 20s. And his mom had unexpectedly found me. I had done an interview online several years ago, and it was posted on a website where they had been interviewing a group of women. And his mom had come across that interview, and she had seen our family photos, and she recognized my daughter and said, I am pretty sure this is their family. So she had kind of been following our family a little bit, and he had once or twice brought things up, but he hadn't really had an interest in searching for her. And she had an impression that she should tell him who we were. And so that afternoon she had sat down and talked with him, and she showed him the article and the pictures and kind of my Facebook page and what little they could see, because my Facebook page is pretty tight as far as, well, it's public now, but because of my business. But he reached out to me, and interestingly enough, the city that he was raised in is the same city that my daughter's in-laws live in, because my daughter is married and has 4 children. and her in-laws live in that same city, and they were there for Christmas. They were visiting her in-laws. And so here they are in the same city at the same time on a day when his mom feels impressed to tell him, and he reaches out to me. And so I reached out to my daughter and said, okay, I need you to get your husband. I need to have a conversation with the two of you. And she immediately said, did dad pass away? Because my husband had been having some health problems. And I said, no, this is a very positive thing, but I think you need your husband next to you when I tell you what's going on. And so I told her that he had reached out, and she said, give him my phone number immediately. Please tell him to call me. And I don't care how late at night he calls, just give him my phone number and tell him that it's okay to call. So I messaged him back and I said, I don't believe in coincidence. And just, you know, she is actually in the same city you're in right now. She's there for the holidays, and he was only home for the holidays because he was going back to college as soon as the holidays were done. And I said, this is her phone number, and she has asked that you give her a call when you're ready, but she doesn't care how late at night. She'd love to hear from you today. And then she called me, I think it was around midnight that night, and they had been on the phone for several hours. And the next day, I believe the next day was Christmas Eve, she got to meet him and his family. And they were so welcoming and just warm and loving and gracious for her and her husband and her 4 children. And they have remained in contact since then. He's up at college, but yeah, he is a part of her life now. And it's just been a beautiful full circle moment. I haven't had a chance to meet him yet. My husband has, because he was traveling and he had an opportunity to meet him. And he just seems like a wonderful young man. So hopefully soon I will have that same opportunity. But it's been a journey.
I can say, as a birth mother myself, the message that I received from my son was, "It will be really okay to call," and a phone number. So I know what it means to get that message, and the feelings that you have at that point in time, because it just opens up a whole flood of emotions that sometimes they
Yeah.
get buried for so long.
Yeah. And she was pretty open. Her husband and her children knew about the situation, and she didn't have a lot of people that she talked to about it, but she would talk to me about it at times, and she thought of him quite often. And he was always in her heart, and even though she knew he was in the right place and where he was supposed to be, she never quit thinking about him. She never forgot that he was there and that he was a part of her heart. But yeah, it's been a beautiful journey. At this point, we have 7 of our 10 kids are married. We have 28 grandchildren and 1 great grandchild. And it's a continuing journey.
So, is your home large enough to hold that family reunion?
Our home is large enough for everybody to be here during the days and for meals. Sleeping, we would cover every square inch of our floor if they all decided to stay here. But we have had that happen in different homes where we've had wall to wall people on the floor. But for the most part, now they'll stay at a hotel, or we have lots of friends that will house them if they need to. We haven't Since we moved to Texas, we are very far away from all of our kids now, except the ones that live right here by us. We have both of our biological sons. Our oldest son lives with us with his wife and 4 kids, as I said, and our youngest biological son lives about 15 minutes away from us with his wife. But the other kids are scattered from east to west and north to south. They are across the United States. So we haven't had a family gathering here in Texas where we've had everybody in Texas at the same time. But 2 years ago, we did have a family reunion up in Utah. We found kind of a centralized place where we could rent some adjoining condos. And for me, you know, I don't know if I shared this with you before, but there have been some really rough times. And, you know, and one of those moments that was excruciatingly painful happened on a Monday. And, you know, one of my children was very confident in informing me that I was, in fact, the world's worst mother and that she would rather be homeless and living under a bridge than living with me. And even though by that point she had been with us for 10 years, it still hurts. You know, you've heard countless times, you've heard that over the years, you know, you're not my real mom, and all of the things that go along with that. And in between, there are beautiful moments when they do bond with you a little bit. But this was one of those rough days when she was unhappy with me and explaining to me that I was horrible. And, you know, I went to bed that night with just a lot of heartache and wondering if we're ever going to get through some of these things that just extend for years. Some of it you get through and you get beyond and you have joy and you just have beautiful, joyous moments. And you have to learn to recognize and lean into those when they happen because there's going to be another speed bump coming up. And 2 days later, she had an experience that really brought to the forefront for her what her life may have been had we not taken her. And she called me that night and she was just sobbing and crying and just apologized for everything that had happened on Monday, apologized for everything she'd done over all the time we had had her, said that she had really gotten a vision of what her life may have been like had we not taken her. And she was sorry for being so complicated and difficult, and that she loved us and she was so grateful for us and for the life that we had given her. And, you know, in that moment, you just have that moment of healing, right? And that moment of connection and love. And you hope it's going to last. It lasts for a little while, and then, you know, it's right back to the normal personality. But for me, my life's motto in that moment became Wednesday will come. We have Mondays throughout our lives that are hard and painful and they hurt. And we have Wednesdays that bring us joy and that bring us healing and hope and the rope to hang on to for the future, right? So from that moment on, my life's motto was Wednesday will come. Whenever I have a Monday that's full of heartache and pain and sorrow and rough stuff, I know that at some point a Wednesday will come. And they don't come in the same week. That was miraculous that it happened 2 days later. But they come, you know, they come a month later, a year later, years later. And I do believe that some of my Mondays will be compensated for in the next life. You know, it just, Wednesday will come is what I hang on to. That for every Monday, there's a Wednesday at some point, and we just hang on for those Wednesday moments that bring us that joy and that peace. And so it's been complicated since they're all adults and out trying to get the family together and have a family reunion. And we had not had the entire family together since 2013. So 2 years ago in 2024, we had this family reunion and all 10 of our children came. And all but one of the spouses was able to make it. His boss just would not let him have the time off work. 24 of our then 27 grandchildren came. And we had 3 days of Wednesday, right? Where it was just love and laughter and healing and hope. And the ability to see that these hard things that had happened, these bridges that have been burned in the past, whether they be between siblings or parents and siblings or whatever, that those things can be left in the past, that they have matured past that, that we can be together as a family and we can find love and joy and happiness despite the ups and downs, despite the tangled webs and roller coaster rides that blending families brings, and so that was my Wednesday of all Wednesdays 2 years ago when we had that reunion, and we hope to have another reunion next summer. We'll see how things go by then, but at any given moment, everybody's happy, or this one's not, or that one's not, or whatever, just normal family life. But I would not trade my life, and I would not trade the experiences that I have had. I mean, it's just by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and also by far the most rewarding thing that I have ever done in my life. And I think that that's what drew me in beyond God's impressions to go and help other families, is wanting for them to find their Wednesdays and understanding our own emotional health, and how when we get to a point that we can understand our emotional health and our thoughts and how they impact our emotions, which drive our actions and create our results, when we start to learn how all of that plays together and we can start getting a handle on that, we can just be, I am so much more effective as a parent now. I tell my kids, okay, you all need to come back home and let me do a do-over, because I didn't have these skills when they were all in the house. I didn't understand emotional regulation. I didn't know I was dysregulated. And we can't help someone else regulate from a dysregulated state. So now I find such joy in helping other families through this journey and helping parents find their calm spot and understand their own emotional hygiene and how to achieve that, and how, teaching them the tools that get them there. And just connecting with these families brings me tremendous joy at this point in my life. So, yeah.
So how do these families that need support reach you, Bonnie?
They can find me, my website, bonniebutlercoaching.com. I'm on Facebook, Bonnie Butler Coaching, Instagram, Bonnie Butler Coaching. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Bonnie Johnston Butler on LinkedIn because there are too many Bonnie Butlers on LinkedIn. But yeah, or they can just email me directly, bonnie@bonniebutlercoaching.com. And I am more than happy to talk to anybody. I do a free consultation. I do 2 summits a year for foster and adoptive families that are free, and they're virtual, so you can attend from your own home. I do coaching through Zoom, so you don't have to live in Texas or in where I'm at to get that coaching help. I do workshops and presentations. I send weekly emails out. So, yeah.
Lots of ways to get in touch and to keep in touch and to get some answers.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Lots of ways to find the resources. So, yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening today. And what a remarkable conversation we've had with Bonnie. She has experienced everything, from adoption, family, from every angle imaginable. She's been a biological mother, a foster parent, adoptive mother, the grandmother, the mentor, the coach. And her story reminds us that adoption it's not a single event. It's a lifelong journey that continues.
Definitely.
Oh, just never ending. But I think the theme that stayed with me throughout this conversation was the importance of belonging, and that every child wants to know where they fit, who loves them, and that they matter. So whether through birth, foster care, adoption, or chosen family, these connections help shape who we become. So Bonnie's experiences reminds us that healing is possible, even with difficult children. And what I'm going to say as Bonnie's last words is, remember that Wednesday will come. I think that's just a perfect way, Bonnie, to say what you had to say. So thank you for sharing your wisdom, your honesty, and your heart with us today. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in another episode of Roots and Branches Adoption Stories on KFED Radio. So if today's conversation touched you, please share it with someone who may need to hear it. You can find all of our episodes at rootsandbranchesadoptionstories.com and on our YouTube channel, which is at Roots and Branches AS. I'm Janet Monroe at Roots and Branches Adoption Stories on KFED Radio. Until next time.